Hey everybody, this is Shane Coyle and this is the Man Uncaved podcast. Before we get into tonight's episode, I just wanted to notify everybody that I have a free online men's group. It's called The Gathering. How you can find that is you go to my Instagram page. That's man_uncaved. The link is in the bio. I make it very simple to join. You hit the link, send you to my email, subject, gathering. In the body, first and last name. You'll receive a link to the Zoom. Come join. It's important when doing this work to be gathered with other men so we all can see our similarities. We can connect to all of our strengths. We can connect to all of our courage and all of the hope that's available there. And again, the idea is that we're learning how to come out of hiding, lower our walls, getting vulnerable, and getting support in the process. It's really important for the healing. Again, Instagram, man_uncaved, link in the bio. It's called The Gathering. I hope to see you there. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Man Uncaved. As always, my name is Shane Coyle. Let's get in the sandbox a little bit tonight because there's a little bit of course, unpacking we do with every episode. This idea is what I've come to recognize how I can tend to block vulnerability. So if this resonates with you, please leave some comments. I really love to know. I can block my own sense of vulnerability. This concept we're going to kind of talk about is how do you turn a fuck you into a thank you? Let me get into this really quick. Understand, as I pan out a little bit, let's just talk about why I would want to block my own vulnerability. Well, obviously we know vulnerability is a very protected place for, I'm sure, a lot of us. Vulnerability is probably the place where we got hurt the most. When we're vulnerable, we either got shamed, we got rejected, we got neglected. So there's a lot of stories in with vulnerability. So I guaranteed vulnerability is probably the most protected place in all of us on the planet. The way that I can block vulnerability is I get into these identities of who I think that I am, which would be called the egoic state of being. I know this is a lot, everyone. I'm throwing a lot of concepts at you, so please stay with me. Don't change the channel just yet. When I'm talking about the ego, we must understand the ego tends to live in two different places as a form of this identity. One side of the egoic sense of self is this idea of inferior or less than. And of course, on the opposite side of that, you would have, I'm better than you, I'm superior than you. Now, I'm not going to get too far into this episode, but I will talk about it another time, actually using the sense of inferior to move us into a sense of superior in a very healthy manner, as opposed to an abusive, manipulative way. But I'm not going to get into that today. If we can hold that space in those concepts, inferior on one side and superior on the next. Now, where these are going to get ignited, of course, are in interpersonal relationships. So it's always going to be an interaction with somebody else. We get to see those parts, whether that be romantic relationship, friendship, parents, family, whoever that might be. That's where those parts get ignited, where we can run the interpretation that I'm disempowered or I'm feeling less than. And sometimes it happens in conflicts or arguments of communication, of disagreements. And this is what I was referring to earlier when I talked about the egoic state of being and who we think we are, because nobody can ever take our power away. That's the illusion. We actually give our power away, and that's what ends up happening, and it starts to play out because it's this idea of who we think that we are. And once that gets activated, this idea of who we think we are, we can take the position of feeling inferior. So what we tend to do is we can take the position to try to make ourselves feel better than or superior. Again, inferior, disempowered. And so what we want to do is elevate ourselves to feel powerful, and that could be at the cost of somebody else. Now, this is what I'm talking about as the fuck you part. So the fuck you part is that I can use to avoid my vulnerability when I'm stuck in an ego state of being as I blame the other person. I make them wrong for being themselves. I make them wrong for having their opinions. I make them wrong for their feelings. I can make them wrong because the ego is about being right. So if I'm right, then guess what you are? Absolutely, you're wrong. And so then it takes on the form of a winner and a loser in this argument, and that becomes the power struggle. And once that power struggle takes hold of that conversation, we're just blind. We're not going to see actually what's happening. And again, so this is the posturing and this is the fuck you part. So I'm in my self-righteous. I'm going to show you how wrong you are. And of course, there's many mechanisms of that. But what I'm referring to right now is the blame. So we blame others for their way of seeing it or for their experience. And at the core of that is to feel powerful because I was feeling powerless, or in control because I'm feeling out of control. Another way that I can block my own sense of vulnerability is I use defense mechanisms. So anger, displacements, all these projections going towards the person. Now, if we just to pan out, look at the idea, defense mechanisms. So my question will always be, well, what are we defending? In the defending, you're defending the concept of who you think you are. We're feeling attacked, so the ego of who we think we are needs to defend itself. And again, when we do that, either by the blame or we use defense mechanisms, we are blocking our own vulnerability. We're taking the fuck you stance. We're making them wrong. We're in a power struggle. We're looking for control. We're looking for power. We're looking to be the winner. That is going to block any connection or a deeper understanding for ourselves or for what is happening in this conflict or this communication. Another idea or concept that I have recognized, we can use compulsive behavior patterns. Now, the compulsive behavior patterns, yes, it does create the lack of vulnerability in the situation. It also takes another form. The compulsive behavior patterns could be used, and this is the withdrawal. So the withdrawal coming from, I'm going to withdraw myself from this power struggle. However, I still have not let go of the ego attachment to the situation. So it comes off looking like revenge. The revenge for making me feel powerless, making me feel inferior. Now, there's a lot of different ways of compulsive behavior pattern. We can resort to using substances. We can resort to any distractions to pull us away. We can get stuck on our phones and social media. We can dive into work. Amongst that, we can binge watch TV, we can eat food. So when I'm talking about compulsive behavior patterns, yes, there's the drinking alcohol and using the drugs to do that, but we can distract from the discomfort and the vulnerability. It's the compulsion to avoid discomforts. And what we're doing is we're robbing ourselves of the experience to feel the reality of the moment, to get into the reality of the moment. We have discussed on the ways we have been avoiding the vulnerability. So, of course, what we would have to do is now move into the vulnerability. So let's talk about that. One is, what is honest about the situation? What is the truth about this situation? Most conversations tend to live in what is called the objective truth and not the subjective truth. I see this a lot with working with couples. I see this a lot in my own arguments at times. As much as I try to step away, we get lost in the objectivity. We don't stay in the subjectivity. What happens is we start rearranging context. We start rearranging the facts. It wasn't on Monday. It was on Thursday. I didn't say it this way. I said it this way. You said it this way. I didn't say it that way. And we're lost in all of the stuff that really doesn't fucking matter. Now we're really not talking about stuff. We're just trying to rearrange the situation to reduce the anxiety around the perceived threat. Instead of staying what is true for ourselves at this moment and what is this person actually saying beneath what he or she is saying. It's like what I say with working with couples. It's not what's being said, it's what's not being said. And that comes into a communication. We'll talk about that in another episode, where how can we communicate from connect as opposed to reject. One is to recognize what's going on with us. And sometimes we actually might need to take a pause. Sometimes we might need to step away from that conversation. But in order to do that, again, you'd have to know I'm getting a little heated. I'm getting a little reactive. So we need to step away from this. Can we come back to this? What would happen is, we come back to this conversation. And in the time that you did take that pause, you are actually calming down. So you're out of your limbic system. And again, that's that you are utilizing that time in that sacred pause to self-regulate. Because of course, I'm sure we can all identify and relate to, we have taken that pause to continue to stay attached to our story of how right we are. So again, how do we utilize that sacred pause is going to be really important, and how we come back into our vulnerability. So being that we did use that time to self-regulate, then we can come back into the conversation and be out of our limbic system. And when we're out of our limbic system, we can bring more consciousness and more reality. Now, some tools to use in that sacred pause is obviously some breathing techniques, grounding techniques, regulating our nervous system, maybe relaxing our rapid heartbeat. And so using some grounding techniques will be very helpful in that sacred pause. Again, how do you utilize that sacred pause is going to be important. So when that happens and you come back to the communication, you come back to the table, and you can honestly speak about what is true for you with a sense of vulnerability and understanding what that activation was and what was really getting triggered at that moment, you can actually tap into vulnerability. And when we tap into that vulnerability, what happens instantaneously, the ego cannot live in vulnerability. So instantaneously, the ego deflates. It's not about right or wrong anymore. It's not about who's winning and who's losing. It's about speaking the truth of what is happening for ourselves. And if you can see it for yourself, you can maybe get into the subjective truth of what it is for the other person. And that is the place of communication and connection, as opposed to communication of rejection. The rejection is the blame. The rejection is the projections and the interpretations and the assumptions. And that is where, and at that moment, we can sink into that vulnerability, and we can understand it from our own sense of self, of what got triggered. We might hold a space for what is going on for the other individual and his or her experience and their subjective truth. Then the fuck you becomes a thank you. We actually see our own blind spots. We see where we got limited. We see the stories that might be associated with that experience that have nothing to do with what's happening right now, but have everything to do about your childhood, relationships, experiences. We restore the intimacy in relationships. We're always going to be, those relationships, these interpersonal relationships are always going to be great tools if used and understood that it's not us against them. It's us against us. We are the ones creating all the limitations, and that maybe if we shift our perspective, and that maybe this is teaching me something, then we can actually advance with each other. It's not a competition. It's not a win or lose situation. And we can see, instead of viewing them as an enemy, and they're our comrades, part of our ally, and they're working with us. There's a song back in the 90s, of course I'm not going to sing, but the song goes, what if God was one of us, just a slob like one of us, just a stranger on the bus trying to find his way home. And I think there's such truth to those lyrics, that the idea is within all of us, there's something to learn if we lower our walls a little bit, if we see beyond the veils to see really what is being spoken here to us, and what is spoken, what they are speaking of, and connecting to what is underneath that, then we can see the humanness in each other, and that maybe everybody is a slob like one of us. It's inclusive, not exclusive, not a slob like you. A slob like you would be the defense mechanisms, the blaming, but one of us. That we all have these tendencies to live unconsciously. We all have these tendencies to live in compulsive behavior patterns blindly. We're human. It's tough being human. And that maybe we're all strangers on the bus, and we're all hopefully trying to find our way home. So I wanted to leave you with that. Hopefully it's positive. Don't want to leave you in doom's gloom. Want to see the realms of possibility, what's possible for all of us. Because obviously we all can probably relate in those conflicts, in those collisions. It's difficult to step away from our own sense of ego, but it is possible. Again, what is your practice? It will take work. Anyway, let me know what you think of this episode. Again, this is Man Uncaved. My name is Shane. If you do like this episode, please leave a review. Please let me know what you think. If this sounds interesting to you and you know somebody who might want to hear this, share it. You never know. It could change somebody's perspective. My name is Shane. We need to come out of hiding.